Paul in the second reading says that if anyone is unwilling to work, neither should that person eat. And the second reading itself kind of dives into the importance of working. And St. Paul has that in several other places. We find that in the New Testament, where St. Paul talks about the value of work. And in fact, it made it into, of course, one of the major pillars of our Catholic social teaching, which, again, is just a collection of all the different things that the popes have said over the last 200 years or so on these various topics related to our society. One of them being, one of those pillar foundational elements is the importance of work, right? And so why do we hear St. Paul talking about if you're not working, you shouldn't eat? Those kind of things. Why do we have that? I'd just like to reflect a little bit. I'm not going to, try and, again, it's one of the major pillars. There's hundreds of pages that have been written by popes and theologians and saints about the importance of work, in addition to what St. Paul said in the Scriptures. I'm not going to read all of those to you. I'd just like to focus on a couple of aspects of that tonight. And I think one of the things is there's kind of two approaches to work. And when I say work, I mean like our vocation, our place in life, right? Whether that's being a mom or a dad, a priest, an accountant, a parent, a retired person, a student. All of those things that we are, no matter where we are at in our lives, we have a calling and we have work to do in that sense that God has given to us. And so there are kind of two approaches to that. There is survival mode, just trying to survive the work that God has given to me or that's been put on my plate. And I think the second approach or second possibility for how to go at what's been given to me by God to do is to allow that work to refine me into a saint, right? To allow that work to transform me and make me into who it is that God is calling me to be. That's one of the things that we see in the church's teaching on work, in addition to St. Paul and again in the saints, etc., is this notion that work, we can embrace it, right? And we can allow these things, the jobs to do that we've been given, again, to make us into saints. And so I think if we look at that survival mode, there's a weakness involved in that, right? There's a weakness involved in saying, I just want to survive. There's this sort of, it's too hard. The stuff that's thrown at me is too hard. And so, surviving work, surviving my vocation, surviving my day, whatever that might be, wherever I'm called, leads to complaining. If we're just trying to survive, then we just complain a lot, right? We complain about what's been given to us. We complain that it's too hard. We complain that it's burdensome. And that leads to like a bad attitude while we're doing the job, right? The thing in life while we're raising the child, feeding the child, being the priest, being the parent, being the retired person, being the student, just a bad attitude about it because I'm just trying to survive and it's really hard and I want to complain a lot. And so also when I feel like that's done, when I reach the end of the day or the day hasn't started yet, there's also a temptation or a tendency to cope with that, to allow like, okay, when I reward myself for just crawling across the finish line, on my hands and knees maybe, and so lots of bad things can kind of creep in at the end of the day. I want to talk a little bit more about that in a second. The allowing our work to make us a saint and to sort of embrace the work that's been given to us and to recognize that it's from God and it has a holy purpose in my life, if I recognize that, it leads to a different attitude. It leads to like this attitude where I want to sort of in a positive way like attack and go after the things that God is putting on my plate that day, right? And say, I'm going to go after this. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm not just trying to survive. I recognize that through this path, through going through these obstacles, these tasks today, that this is part of what's going to refine me. And on the other end, I'm going to come out a saint on that. So I'm going to go after this, right? Now, it's important here to throw in the caveat, we live in a workaholic society, so we do need to make sure we stipulate. We're not saying that if you work 24 hours a day, you're better than the person that works 12. No, God doesn't put 24 hours on anyone's plate, right? It's about making sure we rationally and prayerfully ask, what am I being called to do, and what am I not being called to do? And then do those things that God's asking me to do and not try to do more than that, because that can be a way of coping. right? I can just say I don't want to think about life. I'm just going to bury myself in 24 hours of work and all these kinds of things. No, God's calling us to holy leisure. I've preached about that before, and I don't want to give you 2 homilies in one night. So set that aside. We are called to leisure. We are called to holiness and to take time away. And our culture, again, one of those ways in which we can go too far is by working 24 hours, not what we're saying. But I want to recognize, what is it that I'm called to by God today? And then I'm going to go after those things because I recognize there's a good value in that. Okay. I'm saying, one final comment about that then, I guess, is this work or school or parenting. When I think about that as being like the worst, right? When I think about my job as the worst, my work that I have to do, the roles that I have to play as a parent, as a spouse, it's the worst, right? It leads to problems, and it even leads to addictions. And I want to just share one story about that from my own perspective, from my own life, my own situation. There's a saying that was around even when I was in the seminary. I don't know where it came from, but somebody, Monsignor said that the way to survive being a priest, so then when you're a seminarian, you're like, okay, I'm going to perk up and listen because I'm a little bit worried that I won't survive as a priest because I don't know what I'm doing. Anyways, so somebody, I can't remember who, Monsignor said that the way that you survive is that you put 2 martinis in the freezer and you think about them all day. Anytime something gets hard, and then at the end of the day, you enjoy those, right? And again, that obviously, if that really is as widespread as it seemed to be when I was in the seminary and as a new priest, then we might not. It's obviously a really sad thing that that's happening and that's terrible advice, right? I mean, hopefully we recognize that. One of the things that starts to happen is if I'm trying to survive the day, then when I finally get to the time where it's me time, right, and I don't have any of these burdens that are placed upon me, if I start also engaging in other things, then I start to identify those other things as like the Pavlov's dog thing starts going off, and I'm like, I start thinking about and getting overly attached to those things because I think those things are the reason why I'm finally happy at the end of the day, because I just tried to survive the day. And like that could be anything, right? That's television, that's games, Instagram, alcohol, drugs, internet, shopping, TV, all that, right? Whatever those things are, if you're a survive the day kind of person, and when you get to the end of the day, if you have those other things, those things aren't bad, and it's not like we can't do those, that we can't watch television, that we can't have a drink, that we can't play a video game. But if you start to think about that Instagram is when I'm happy, right? Because I just tried to survive the day and I got through it, right? I noticed for myself, and again, I'll just share about that Monsignor story. I have not been intoxicated in my priesthood. And I think there was one time about 16 years ago, as I tried to think about this homily, that I probably had too much to drink at a campfire one time. That was the last time, 16 years ago, so I don't want you to think that your priest is an alcoholic. But I did realize about a month ago, it kind of hit me that I was kind of falling into that pattern a little bit of just like at the end of the day having a drink at dinner, or after the last meeting or whatever. And I was just kind of I recognized I was kind of starting to get overly thinking about it. And so I just made the decision I'm not going to do that anymore, right? About a month ago, that I'm not going to have a drink like that alone, just because it isn't the problem, but we get overly attached to that. And the real issue ultimately was the fact that I was trying to survive things, right? That I was just trying to kind of at times just like, okay, just survive the day. And then that was the issue. That's what needed to be fixed. And that's the main thing that we all need to work on. I think that's what I would challenge us to do and invite us to think about. Do you have things at the end of the day that you just turn to that are addictions or other things like that you overly cling to? I think look and examine, how do you view your day? How do you view the things that God's putting on your plate? And do you recognize them as the saints do and as the church is asking us to do and as St. Paul is asking us to do? Do you recognize them to be the things that God has given us to become saints, or are they obstacles to be survived?